This is The Agenda.
On Dubai Eye 103.8, the UAE's #1 talk radio station.
Hello there. Let's take a look now at a story coming out of Dubai because a local sheep farm is planning to massively expand its operations. Verticroft Holdings is moving its operations south to a huge farm in Abu Dhabi with the plan to rear 7,000 sheep. But it's not an ordinary farm. The team there breed Australian white sheep that are more suited to the heat, and they say they can farm sustainably. Now, the move could transform farming in the UAE with the added benefit of improving animal welfare because, of course, locally reared stock reduces the need for live imports, and there have been quite a lot of recent studies on the problems that can be caused with importing live lambs. Now, at present, about 10 million live animals are imported into the region from Australia, and that is around $3 billion worth. So you get a sense of just how valuable this market could be if only you could figure out a way to sustainably and effectively farm sheep, effectively lambs, right here in the UAE. Now, one man who reckons he knows how to do it is Amine Ben, who is the Chief Operating Officer from Verticroft Holdings. He very kindly joins me right now on Microsoft Teams. Amine, how are you?
I'm fine. Thank you, Georgia. How are you?
I am very well indeed, sir. Very lovely to have you join us on the line. Thank you very much indeed. Now, first up, I'm very intrigued by the fact that it's called Verticroft Holdings. I suppose I'm from a farming background, and normally it says so-and-so farm. So I'm intrigued to know what the farm itself is like.
So really, the farm is a state-of-the-art commercial sheep farm that's located in the desert of Al Khazna, based in the Emirate of Abu Dhabi. It's a really nice farm where we've got staff and veterinarians that are on site 24/7, looking after the welfare of the animals and ensuring their well-being. We're constantly doing analysis and reporting that's data-driven to really ensure that the animals are always in the best condition and at the best performance levels. We've also planted thousands of trees and plants to make a microclimate. It's something that we piloted in Dubai, and what we found is that it dropped the temperature significantly and brought in other types of birds and species that allows for a microclimate and ecosystem that works well together. In the summer, the sheep are housed in extremely tall in temperature-controlled greenhouses that allow the sheep to be comfortable in the summer months. During the winter months, they're in extremely ventilated tall sheds that allows the wind to pass through. Now, we don't cram the sheep into small spaces. They've got 3 times the recommended international spacing, and that keeps them really comfortable. It gives them a lot of places to roam. So the sheep are quite comfortable in the environment, and we've seen really, really good performance figures.
Okay, so I mean, first question, when I think of a sheep, it's woolly. I mean, I presume they're not, you sort that out, don't you?
Yeah, so a lot of people think sheep are just big woolly things, and that's the common misconception. But really, you've got different types of sheep, and what we've got is a haired sheep, and this isn't really just a normal haired sheep. It's what you would call a high-performance meat sheep. It's been bred to produce some of the world's finest lamb. So it's been bred for its high-quality eating properties. Now, over and above that, it's got really high growth rates, which means that it gains around 350 grams per day, high feed conversion ratios. It's really easy to care for. It's self-shedding, so as the temperature rises, it will shed hair, and as it gets a little bit colder, it'll grow more hair. So that means that it doesn't need to be sheared. Now, what that translates into for farmers is easier care and more profitability.
That is fascinating. So my best friend in Dorset, where I grew up, in the United Kingdom, is a sheep farmer. And so at the moment, of course, it's lambing season, so she puts lots of pictures up on Instagram. And all the sheep are entirely different. They're massive and fluffy and very woolly indeed. And I hadn't quite realised that you could get such a different type of sheep and that would obviously, work a lot better in this climate. Now, the other big element, I presume, is the feed for sheep. When in Dorset, where it's green and verdant, they all go out on the lawns and, they go out in the fields and they just eat the grass, which is lovely and cheap and effective. You mows the lawn in many ways. But here we don't really have that effect. So do you have to import the feed as well? And doesn't that add costs?
Yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, it would be fantastic to have big, beautiful grazing fields here, but unfortunately, it's not the case, and we needed to adapt and find various solutions in order to be able to rear livestock here. So we do import some of our feed. We produce some of it on the farm using technology like hydroponics, but the more important thing is that when it comes to commercial sheep farming, what you put in is what you get out. So we had to vertically integrate and produce our own forage crops that are consistently reliable, and the quality is there day in and day out. So in solving that problem with the feed and having the combination of good genetics on the farm, we are now able to produce a high quality lamb in the UAE for less than the cost of importing fresh lamb.
Really? So just to clarify, so do you import the fodder? Is that correct?
Yes, we do.
But I guess importing fodder is cheaper than importing sheep, I guess, live sheep in many ways. But that is really interesting that it's actually cheaper than bringing them in live. I mean, just for people who aren't familiar with the sort of the farming landscape, so to speak, or the meat industry, why is it important for the UAE to rear its own livestock rather than to do that importing process?
Well, as you mentioned earlier, Georgia, this region's got a live animal requirement. We import 10 million live animals into this region every year. So it's critical that we have our own supply on the ground of live animals. Food security is paramount for this region. And it's not only about vegetables or producing veg in greenhouses. Protein is a big portion of that diet. And as I heard you mention, people here are always eating meat. It's a big part of all the menus. And if we have a localized supply chain, it's very important in ensuring our food supply chains. And, pressure continues to mount around the world on live animal exports. And this region, we believe, will be left with a gap for its live animal requirements in the coming years.
There is also the element that the reality is that if you're importing live animals, you're putting them on a boat in Australia and then bringing them here, and obviously it would be infinitely preferable for the sheep not to have to go through that process before it comes to your plate, I guess. And I imagine farming in the UAE resolves that problem entirely.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. From an animal welfare standpoint, it's much better to rear livestock here than to put them on livestock vessels. Pressure around the world continues to mount on these livestock vessels and carriers, so they're reducing the number of trips that they do. Ships don't sail in the summer months, so it's really important that we start to produce some of our requirement here.
It's amazing that you've managed to make it sustainable, and I love the idea of these microclimates that you've created down there to make it slightly cooler. I've got about 30 seconds left with you. What's next for your farm?
Well, next is to scale it to 7,000 head, and our goal is not to only be a meat farmer, but we like to call ourselves the UAE's BFF when it comes to red meat production. And BFF for us stands for breed, feed, and farming practices, and that's something that we want to supply the region with. So it's about the philosophy of teach a man to fish rather than giving him a fish, and we believe with the right tools that this region can become self-sufficient in red meat production.
Really interesting. And I have to say, you're the first person who's given me a convincing argument for how this country is going to be able to create or produce enough protein to support itself should the occasion arise, should you need to suddenly rely on your own food security. Absolute pleasure to speak to you, sir. Thank you very much for joining me on the line. That was Amine Ben, the Chief Operating Officer of Verticroft Holdings, speaking right here on The Agenda on Dubai 103.8. Your news is next.